Hi, my name is Bibek Adhikari. I am your English instructor. In today's class, we are going to solve the grammar portion of Unit 16, that is reflexive pronouns. So let's begin. So in this class, we are going to start learning the reflexive pronouns. So first of all, let us know what reflexive pronouns are. We have two different kinds of reflexive pronouns, and they are singular and plural. In the singular form, we have words like myself, yourself, himself, herself, itself as reflexive pronouns. While in the plural case, we have ourselves, yourselves, and themselves. So these are the reflexive pronouns, right? So myself is changed into ourselves, while yourself is changed into yourselves, himself or herself is changed into themselves, and itself is changed into themselves. So this is the list. Now let us discuss when we use a reflexive pronoun. When to use. So when to use a reflexive pronoun. Let me write one example. I am teaching myself to play the piano. I am teaching myself to play the piano. Or I can say something like this. Be careful with that knife. You might cut yourself. So when I write sentences like these, I am using a reflexive pronoun, myself and yourself. Alright, so I am using a reflexive pronoun as a direct object. When the object is same as the subject of the verb. What is the subject of this sentence? This is the subject of the sentence. I am teaching myself. So the subject correlates with the word myself as the direct object. And what is the subject of the second sentence? You is the subject of this sentence, which then correlates with the reflexive pronoun yourself. So it is acting as a direct object. We can also use reflexive pronoun as direct object with most transitive verbs. But these are the most common. Let me give you the list. So verbs like amuse, hurt, blame, introduce, cut, kill, dry, prepare, enjoy, satisfy, help, teach. So these are the verbs that we often use with the reflexive pronoun. Amuse myself, hurt oneself, blame yourself, introduce himself, cut yourself, dry themselves, kill yourself, prepare the meal himself, enjoy ourselves, satisfied themselves, helped ourselves, taught myself, right? So some verbs change their meanings slightly when they have a reflexive pronoun as direct object. For example, when we write something like this, would you like to help yourself to another drink? Would you like to help yourself to another drink? This means would you like another drink, right? Would you like to help yourself? So what is the verb? Help is the verb. Would you like to help yourself? What is the direct object? Yourself is the direct object. Would you like to help yourself to another drink? This means would you like to take another drink? If you say something like, I wish the children would behave themselves, that means I wish the children would behave well. Right? If you say something like, he found himself lying by the side of the road, that means he was surprised when he realized that he was at the side of the road. So let me write this sentence. He found himself lying by the side of the road. He found himself lying by the side of the road. So this is the sentence. Where is the reflexive pronoun? Here is the reflexive pronoun. Alright, where is the verb? Found is the verb. So he found himself lying by the side of the road. What does this sentence mean? It seems a little awkward when you read it, because for the first time if you're reading this sentence, it sounds a little awkward, right? He found himself lying by the side of the road. What does that mean? This means he was surprised when he realized that he was at the side of the road. When you say, sentence like this, I saw myself as a famous actor. What does this mean? You saw yourself. What did you do? What is the verb? Saw is the verb. Whom did you see? You saw yourself. That is the direct object. Alright? I saw myself as a famous actor. That means you imagined that you were a famous actor. He busied himself in the kitchen. What does that mean? When we say, sentences like this one, he busied himself. He busied himself in the kitchen. He busied himself in the kitchen. What does this mean? This means he got himself engaged. He worked busily in the kitchen. Alright? If I write a sentence like this, he washed himself in cold water. He washed himself in cold water. Now I ask you this, is this sentence correct? Of course not. We do not use a reflexive pronoun after verbs which describe things people usually do for themselves, such as wash, shave, dress. So washing is done for yourself, right? It is very obvious. What is the verb? Washed is the verb. He washed himself, so there's no use of himself. You can simply say he washed in cold water. Let's take another example. He always shaved himself before going out in the evening. He always shaved himself. What is the verb? Shaved is the verb. What is the direct object? Himself is the direct object. Now, do we really need himself? Who does the person is going to save, other than himself? He always shaved himself before going out in the evening. We shave ourselves. So why use this? The sentence reads correctly without the direct object. He always shaved before going out in the evening. Himself is not required. Michael dressed himself and got ready for the party. Michael dressed and got ready for the party. I dressed myself. You don't need to say that, right? You don't need to say something like, I dressed myself. You can say something like you dressed your younger sister or you dressed someone else. But dressing yourself is pretty obvious. So it is what we call stating the obvious. The sentence is correct as I dressed. But on a second note, if we are using reflexive pronoun as emphasis, we do use these kinds of reflexive pronouns. How do we do that? Let's find out. So the first example is he dressed himself in spite of his injuries. So he dressed himself. The verb is here. The direct object is here. So we do need this reflexive pronoun, this direct object. Why? Because we are trying to give emphasis, or we are rather trying to emphasize. Since we are trying to emphasize, we should use this reflexive pronoun. Let me give you one more example. She is old enough to wash herself. All right, so we are applying a condition here. She is old enough. Old enough is the condition. Wash herself. What is the verb? Wash is the verb. What is the direct object? Herself is the direct object. Do we need this direct object? That is the question. Of course we do. And why do we need this direct object? Because we are emphasizing, we are emphasizing some condition in these sentences. That's why we use reflexives when we are emphasizing. Another use. Let's talk about, reflexive pronouns as indirect objects. Until now, we studied reflexive pronouns as what object? Direct object. Now, let's study reflexive pronouns as indirect objects. So, as indirect or indirect object. Let me write one example. Would you like to pour yourself a drink? Would you like to pour yourself a drink? So, who? What is the verb? Pour is the verb. Yourself, is it a direct object or an indirect object? Of course it is an indirect object. As an indirect object, where the indirect object is the same as the subject of the pronoun. So, subject of the verb. What is the subject of the verb? You is the subject of the verb. Would you like to pour yourself a drink? Would you like to do something, right? So, we are talking about reflexive pronouns as indirect objects. One more example, quick. We've brought ourselves something to eat. We brought ourselves something to eat. So what is the verb? Brought is the verb. Where's the indirect object? Here is the indirect object. What is the subject? Subject is we've. We brought ourselves something to eat. What did we bring? We brought something to eat. But whom did we bring something to eat? Ourselves, right? We also use reflexive pronouns as the object of the preposition. Let's look at that. As the object of a preposition. As the object of a preposition. So as the object of a preposition when the object refers to the subject of the clause. For example, they had to cook for themselves. Let me write one more example. He was feeling very sorry for himself. Alright, let's find the verbs and the reflexive pronouns. Verb here, reflexive pronoun here. Verb here, and the reflexive pronouns here. So, they had to cook for themselves. For whom? So, we are talking about object of preposition. What is this? Direct or indirect? Direct object or indirect object. This is nothing, This is object of preposition. Another example, he was feeling very sorry for himself. For himself. For whom? For himself. Object of preposition. Alright? But there's a warning. What is the warning? The warning is this. He had a suitcase beside him or beside himself. Decide what is the correct answer. He had a suitcase beside him or beside himself. This is the area where many students get confused. He had a suitcase beside him or he had a suitcase beside himself. Of course, he had a suitcase beside him, not himself. Himself is wrong. Why? Because we use a personal pronoun, not reflexives, after prepositions of place. So we are talking about prepositions of place, and after prepositions of place, what do we use? We use personal pronouns. What do we use? We use personal pronouns, not the reflexive pronouns. So you cannot say something like, she had a few friends with herself. Very bad. You need to say something like, she had a few friends with her, right? More uses on reflexive pronoun now. More uses on reflexive pronoun. She walked home by herself. And what does this phrase by herself mean? It means she did something alone without any help. So this means she did something alone. Alright? She walked home by herself. That means he was all alone when she walked home. You can say something like, I prepared the whole meal by myself. I prepared the whole meal by myself. What does this mean? This means you did the work all alone. Alright? You did the work all alone. More uses. Dharan itself is quite a small town. Dharan itself is quite a small town. What does this mean? Itself. Why do we use this? Because we are emphasizing. So emphasize, right? We're using this to emphasize the quality of Dharan. Especially when we talk about someone very famous, we use this. For example, Sir Paul McCartney himself sang the final song. Sang the final song. So we are trying to emphasize that this famous person from the Beatles, Sir Paul McCartney himself, sang the final song. Alright? So we often put the reflexive pronoun at the end of the clause when we're using emphasis. Like we say something like, I picked the braid myself, didn't I? She mended the car herself. So these are all, uses when we are emphasizing. We are doing what? We are emphasizing. So we use the reflexive pronouns. Alright? Now time for some homework, like always. Homework time. Try these questions. My father does his work a blank space. Number B. He is pointing to blank space. Pointing where? So pointing to Pointing, I mean the reflexive pronoun. My sister can dress blank space. So how can she dress? Number D. Cat found blank space, a bone. So these are the questions that you need to do. All you have to do is supply these sentences with proper reflexive pronouns. Can you do this? I guess you can. Right? So with this we have come to end of today's class. If you have any questions or suggestions regarding these video series, feel free to write us at learning@deerwalk.edu.np. Thank you.